Tea Party group, and he has been a tremendous leader with the Canton Tea Party. So if you all would join with me, we'll make welcome Bob Hall, and we're going to turn the meeting over to him.
Well, I think everybody should be able to hear me okay. Can you?
Yeah.
All right, without the microphone? Fine. First of all, I want to thank you so very much for coming out tonight. I hope we get out of here before the rain comes.
Well, that's tomorrow night.
That's
It's
tomorrow.
tomorrow night?
Tomorrow
Well, it's
night,
been moving
24
so much
hours.
The way it looked out there. Okay. But what I want to do is I'll talk with you a little bit to give you an understanding of why I'm doing this. And then I'd like to open it up and let you ask me questions that you might have about things that you think ought to be done differently, or how you think what I would do in handling it. I'll start by saying, as many of you know, I never really expected to be standing here doing this. Kay and I had built a retirement home near Canton and planned to retire there and travel, fly the plane, etc. And then Barack Obama came along, and look at what he's done. It is worse than what we anticipated. But I feel led to do this. This has not been my life's ambition to do it, but when I look at the situation we're in and what's happening, this is not about me, and it's not about my opponent. Because as far as I'm concerned, it's nothing personal. He is, as far as I know, he is a good father, he is a good husband, he's a good doctor, delivers lots of babies, and he plays the drums. And he's a good drummer, because I've heard him play. He just ought to be playing the drums and delivering babies, not making our legislature, our laws down in Texas with the way he likes to vote. One of the things that people ask me, one of the first things is, well, what do you have in mind for legislation? Well, when you take a look at our legislature here in Texas, you know, they draft up about several thousand bills each time they get together, and they pass 700-800 of these every time. But the good news is, unlike some other states that meet continuously or every year, in Texas, I don't know if you know this stuff, but Texas only meets every 2 years for 140 days. So I figured we could protect the people if we got a bill that said they would only meet every 140 years for 2 days. We could cut back on some of these changes. Texas, I've read the memos that have been put out by our legislators that come home and talk about the great job that they've done and where we are. But if you look at what has happened since 2001, that was a year before our incumbent senator was elected, 2001, the state budget was about $48 billion. Our population at that time was about 21 million people. Since then, Texas has grown about 2 to 3 million, depending on who's doing the head count, and you get a different number. But it's roughly, let's say it's 2.5 million. It has grown, and we've had inflation that has raised the cost of doing business. And recently, in his announcement, he said that during the time he's been in office, the state legislature has managed to keep their budget in line with the state's growth in population and inflation. Well, I look at the data that comes off the Texas website, off of the comptroller, and is put together by Texas for Public Policy in Austin. And if you look at that data, you will see that this past legislative session, the budget they passed was a little over $100 billion, well over $100 billion, up from $48 billion. Inflation and population growth would account for a budget at about $55 billion. We're double. We have doubled the size of government since my opponent has been in office. Twice the size. That's not a few percentage off. And I bring that up because in many conversations, and you take a look, I passed out a sheet that has a whole list of issues where we differ. He is detached from the conservative values of East Texas. And as many of you have been to our Tea Party meetings and know what I've talked about for the last 5 years, is that I am a true conservative who truly believes in all of the principles of limited government, of conservatism. Limited government. That means we keep our government only doing the thing it's supposed to be doing. And that's really limited to about 6 issues. There's transportation, there's education, there's management of natural resources, there's our justice system, criminal, fire, police, our emergency services, and medical services for the indigent. Now, once we took federal money, we are required to do that. So that's a required part of the Texas structure. Outside of that, government needs to leave things to the private sector to be done. Yet we continue to spend, and he has voted for this budget increases, includes things like the Emerging Technology Fund, which is funding companies to do research work. That's not our government's business, folks. It is the enterprise fund. That is like Barack Obama's stimulus program, where he hands out money to companies like AT&T and Exxon and Mobil and Microsoft to do business here. We gave $129 million last year to Hollywood to come make movies here in Texas. That's not the government's business, but my opponent voted to do that. In addition to that, we gave out $250 million over a 10-year period, $25 million at a time, to Formula One racing, for them to bring Formula racing to Texas. Now, I'm not opposed to, Lou, don't get at me, I'm not opposed to racing, but that's private enterprise.
You're right.
That's where it belongs. The government has no business getting into the business side.
They can make money without the government's money.
If it's a good deal,
It'll be a good
Lou's a businessman, there are other businessmen here. If it's a good deal, business people will get into it and will do it. What we need to be doing is getting government out of the way. They talk about Texas is the #1 magnet for businesses. I can tell you the facts don't support that, folks. We have dropped in the last couple of years. Texas used to be number 4. We're down to number 6. And in the freedom ratings, we're way down in the middle of the pack. Education, we're near the bottom of the states in education. And these are by independent analysis. So we're not as well off as people would like us to think we are. Our debt. I'm going to surprise you with this one. You realize that Texas is number 2 in the nation in total debt. Number 2. We're only exceeded by California. We're also number 2 in the nation in per capita debt. That is what each one of us owes as a result of our state and local debt. We're number 2, right behind New York. We have more per capita debt than California. Think about that one. We always like to make fun of California and how they spend their money. We're doing a worse job of what we're borrowing. And this is what our reps and senators in the state come home and tell us about, having done a good job. So they've driven us in debt. We went from about, I think it was 21 billion in about 2001 to today it's well over $320 billion that Texas owes. So if you think the feds are bad, here in Texas we're just as bad. It's a function of the way our government is being run that's happening. Now, some of the things that we differ on, I will just talk about a few of them. And I only do this to show what I believe in and how I would vote. So you can make a decision. It's not a thin, narrow red line between the two of us. It's a huge chasm. We're at opposite ends of the spectrum on these. Because he has consistently talked about wanting to raise the gas tax. Well, folks, with the price of gasoline, we don't need to raise the gas tax. But even worse than that, we have a practice here in Texas that has been approved by our legislature, and they do it in more than one place, and that is called diversions. We divert 47% of the gas taxes being collected right now to something other than roads and bridges. My feeling is that we need to use the money on roads and bridges that we're collecting now before we talk about needing to raise the gasoline tax for more roads and bridges. If at that time it's needed, then we need to talk about how we go about doing it. We call it truth in taxation. That is, that we should, if we collect the tax for one purpose, that's what we use it for. If we don't use it all, then let's give it back to the people. If we're going to tax them for something else, then do that. But don't tax in one place and just have that as my opponent loves to talk about, revenue streams. You know, they don't really talk about it. It's taxing. It's taxes, folks. But use it where we collect it. That's where we differ. Texas has a low interest rate on these huge notes we have because we have a very high credit rating. One of the reasons we have that high credit rating is because we have a rainy day fund, which means that if the economy hiccuped, if the oil and gas industry got shut down by the EPA or for whatever reasons, and we all know that the oil and gas business in Texas is cyclical. It's been up and it has been down. And just because it's up, there is no reason to think it's going to stay up forever. My opponent has, every time is asked the question that I have seen that was recorded by the Texas Tribune or on various YouTubes of how do we go about balancing the budget, what do we need to do? This happened particularly in the 82nd legislature where we were short money. His answer has been, well, we need to find new streams of revenue, or we need to use the rainy day fund, or both. Those are his answers. I strongly feel that Texas does not have a revenue problem. Let me underline that and put that in bold letters. Texas does not have a revenue problem. We collect plenty of money. What we have is a spending problem. We have legislature that wants to spend. This past session, we had an $8 billion surplus that came in because of the oil and gas industry. More money than was expected. If anywhere you were down there in Austin, you didn't dare get between any of the legislatures and that money or you've been run over. It was like a shark feeding frenzy down there trying to figure out how to spend that money. So between what they went after there and going after the rainy day fund this past session, they increased Texas spending in this year biennium alone 26%. Folks, that's a lot of money. That is a lot of money. And we were doing okay without that. It was not necessary. The reason they did it, it was there. It was there, so they spent it. And they have another practice of balancing the budget, and they did this in the 82nd legislature. They'll come home, has anybody not gotten a letter that said anything about the budget? They always talk about how proud they are that they have balanced it. We balanced the budget. Let you know a little secret. It's a constitutional requirement. They can't leave there unless they balance the budget. And there's only one of two ways to do that. Either you reduce spending or you increase revenue. That's only two answers. My opponent has, in open meetings, he has mocked me as being a person who says that we need to cut spending to balance the budget. And I say, absolutely, I'm guilty. We are, because my opponent says the way we balance the budget is we raise the revenue to match what we want to spend. And I don't think that's what we need to do. So we differ on that significantly. A few years back, he wanted to change the way that we put our judges here in Texas on the bench. Right now they're elected. Germany in the before 1930s when Hitler took over. And one of the first things he did was to change the way they put the judges on the bench and had them appointed. When you have a judge appointed, they are not responsible to anyone for their actions. Have you noticed any problem with our federal judges and activists on the bench who are appointed by the government? Folks, that's the last thing in the world we need, is to have our state judges appointed. They need to be elected. The rationale was, it's tough on them to have to campaign. Well, my heart bleeds, my goodness gracious. But no, we need to have our judges appointed. Elected, I'm sorry. Yes, elected. Elect our judges. Another point is we've had numerous energy efficiency green bills that have been passed, where we bought electric cars for state employees. We had an incident where a bill where he wanted to take our state employees in our EPA, state EPA, and have them enforce the federal EPA laws for the feds, so the feds didn't have to come here and do it. We're going to let our own people and enforce them. Folks, it's hard for me to even comprehend that one. I'm sure all of you know that one of the first bills he tried to get passed when he got to the legislature was free needles for drug addicts. Now, that to me is one where you cross the line, where you start doing things to condone bad behavior. Now, there's arguments that say, well, they get sick, they get they get sick using the needles. Yes, they do, but they also get sick by using bad drugs. So is our next step to provide them state-provided drugs so they don't get bad drugs? I mean, the next thing to do would be handing out handguns to bank robbers so that they make sure they have something they can rob with efficiently. That to me that's not a function of responsibility of government, and it's certainly not the values that a constitutional conservative with Judeo-Christian values would condone. And along that line, when we're talking about it, one of the most egregious that I found, and I'm sure that many of you have here daughters and granddaughters, but he had a bill where he wanted to have our teenage daughters and granddaughters to have access to prescription contraceptives without parental permission or knowledge, either one. Folks, they can't even get an aspirin in school without filling out forms and something. But that again is trampling on parental rights. We need to be encouraging parents to take responsibility for their children, not getting between the parent and the child. This past session, two particular bills, some of you may be aware of them. One was an Agenda 21 issue that would have required bicycle paths on all of our highways here in Texas. Now, folks, we built highways for automobiles. Automobiles pay for those highways. And if you've been around any communities where they put in the bicycle paths, you'll see that traffic is a nightmare, and it is very expensive. It's damaging to the economy. Lots of good reasons not to do something like that. We need bike trails. There are plenty of places to put bike trails for people to go ride bikes. They do not have to ride them on the highways. I've got kids that are nuts about bikes. They ride bikes all the time. But I don't think we need to have our highways for them to ride on doing that. But the one, this next one, it didn't fit with the mindset that went with other things that was done. You see, our legislature put together a joint resolution between the House and the Senate that went to our congressional delegation saying, Texas wants you to defund Obamacare. This was early in the session. Texas wants you to defund Obamacare. And the legislators signed it. But guess what? Our incumbent senator refused to sign that resolution. And I think I understand why, because he was also sponsoring a bill it was SB 303, that if it had passed, which it passed the Senate, but the House didn't take it up, it would have codified, that means made it law here in Texas, medical death panels, just like you'll find in Obamacare. That's hard to imagine, but it would have. Now there's lots of this, he has lots of good reasons about why it doesn't and so on, but the bottom line is it gives, the argument I got from one of his campaign folks sent me a letter saying, we are not have death panels here. Those are committees formed by the hospital. Panel, committee, what difference does it make? The end result is the same thing. The end of life decision is taken out of the patient's hand, it's taken out of the family's hand, or the surrogate's hand, and it goes to this committee in the hospital. But it didn't pass, but that was his bill. The path we're on is unsustainable. The debt we are on is unsustainable. And let me just tell you one more piece about how I approach this, because it comes with where I come from. I went to a military school. It's called the Citadel. It was an all-male military school, and it was locked the barracks kind of place. That I only went there, started out to go there for a year, but after spending a year there, I decided there was nothing, no way I wasn't going to stay and graduate. But one thing that they hammered into us as a part of our way of life was called the Honor Code. And this was administered by the cadets. The administration had nothing to do with it, but it was real simple. It had 4 parts to it. A cadet did not lie, cheat, steal, nor tolerate those who do. Now the first 3 are pretty easy to understand and do, lying, cheating, or stealing. The 4th one was the tough one, because what that meant was, if I saw one of my fellow cadets lie, cheat, or steal, I was obligated to turn him in, or I was as guilty of the violation as he was if I didn't do that. And so that kept everybody working together, and it also, I'll call those 3 bad behavior. Lying, cheating, stealing, that's bad behavior. What we have going on down in Austin, and we have it in Washington, is a lot of bad behavior. But we have people who tolerate it. They tolerate it. They see it happening, but they don't say anything about it. They don't do anything about it. We have people who continuously vote to raise the budget spending. It's our children's money that they're spending. Actually, what it is stealing. What we have with our debt is downright, I'm not politically correct, so I'm just going to tell you the way I see it. We are stealing from our children and our grandchildren their future. We are burdening them with a debt that will take 6 generations to pay off. And I think that's unconscionable. But like our elected officials who go down to Austin or go to Washington and tolerate it, if we keep sending the same people to Austin and Washington, we are tolerating their bad behavior. And we are as guilty of the spending as they are, because we allow them to do it. There is not an elected official in the state of Texas that goes to Austin on his own or goes to Washington on his or her own. They go because people like us in this room let them go. Either we vote for them or we don't do enough to keep them from going by helping their opponents or the more conservative. And folks, for one thing, I want to be able to look at grandchildren in the future and be able to say, I tried to do something. But more than that, I would hope sometime in the future, a couple of generations from now, the kids, rather than find themselves in such a dismal condition in life, living under tyranny and debt that they can't get out of having not so nice things to say about their great-granddad or granddad or whatever it is, I would rather be able to hold their head up and say, my grandpa, my grandma, or my mom and my dad, boy, when things were really getting bad, they turned to, and they stepped into the breach, and they helped turn this country around back in 2013, 2014, when we were about to go over the cliff. They were part of that new generation of getting involved. They had gotten over their ignorance and the apathy and not paying attention to what was going on, to get involved with it and doing something. And that's where we are, because we don't all get involved and start being active and trying to get people who want to make a difference, to change what is going on down there. I'm not looking to go there to make that a career. I've had a career. I'm going there to make a difference. I'm going there to stop what has been happening and work with the few that are down there now, and hopefully many more, because we've got some really good conservatives across the state running for both the House and the Senate, that if they all get elected, we will be able to make a difference. So, I'm in this because part of our retirement, when I went to the Bible to see where the chapter was, I was on retirement to tell me how I was supposed to retire. I couldn't find that chapter in the Bible. So here I am, and this is where we're going. We plan to be standing in the gap to fight this. Whether God decides to let us win this or not, that's His decision. That's not in my mind. Ours is the work to do. It's what we do to try to win that's going to count, because that's our individual work. Collectively, that's what God is going to decide. So the question I have to ask you is, are you going to continue to let the people go to Austin and Washington and be going there that have gotten us into this mess? Or are you willing to stand with Kay and I and the others who want to try to make a difference and help get us to Austin and Washington so we have that opportunity? That's the question. With that, thank you so much. I'm going to open it up now and let you ask a question. Yes, sir.
Well, in your opening remarks, you said something about what the government was responsible for. One of those things was education. On the federal level, I think we could do without the Department of Education.
Absolutely.